You think a badge on the chest grants power. We have been conditioned to believe that this piece of stamped metal is a magic talisman that places a person above the laws of physics and morality. We believe that a uniform is armor, and the law is a shield that protects against the consequences of any actions. But in November 1964, on a rain-soaked and hopeless Seattle street, Patrol Officer Miller faced a cruel, cold truth. Gravity doesn't give a damn about your badge. Biomechanics doesn't care what your rank is. When a bone breaks, it makes the same sound whether you are a criminal or a police lieutenant. Miller saw a small man walking through the rain, and his brain, poisoned by impunity, made a fatal classification error. He decided that before him was a victim. He didn't see a predator. He saw only an opportunity to exert force to feed his eternally hungry ego. But pay attention to one detail that Miller took for granted. On his wide leather belt, next to a heavy baton, hung steel handcuffs, Smith & Wesson, Model 100. Cold, hardened steel created to deprive a human of freedom. Remember their glint in the light of the street lamps. In 30 seconds, this metal will be the only thing holding Officer Miller back from total personality disintegration. The click of their lock will sound faster than a human heart can beat once. Seattle that evening resembled a set for a bad detective movie. The rain didn't just fall, it hung in the air as an icy suspension, chilling to the bone and washing all colors from the streets, leaving only shades of gray. Officer Miller was a man who loved his job too much, but for entirely the wrong reasons. 110 kilograms of state-sanctioned aggression. He didn't patrol this district to protect and serve. He patrolled it like a feudal lord, surveying his domain, looking for those who did not show due respect. Bruce Lee was simply walking home after training. He was tired, but it was the pleasant fatigue of a man who had just pushed the boundaries of his capabilities. Hands in his jacket pockets to keep warm. Head down so the raindrops wouldn't hit his face. To Miller, watching him from the window of the patrol car, this posture looked like weakness, like submission, like guilt. In Miller's world, if you hide your face, it means you have something to hide. He didn't understand that, for a martial arts master, such a posture is a method of conserving energy and concentration. The patrol car cut Bruce off with a screech of tires, blocking his path to the sidewalk. The door opened, and Miller stepped out, lazily tapping his baton against his thigh. He moved slowly, savoring the moment. He knew the script by heart. Now the suspect would get scared, start making excuses, maybe even tremble. Fear is a drug, and Miller was an addict. "Hey, you," he growled, and his voice, accustomed to barking commands, drowned out the noise of the rain. "Where are we rushing to?" Miller stood right up close, violating personal space, using his size as a weapon of psychological pressure. He loomed over Bruce like a cliff. At this moment, any normal person would have stepped back. A step back is an instinctive reaction to a threat. It is a way of saying, "I am not dangerous. Don't touch me." But Bruce didn't take a step back. He stopped moving altogether. He froze. And in this stillness, there was something unnatural. It wasn't the paralysis of a victim. It was the absolute silence before an explosion. Miller, blinded by his status, didn't notice how Bruce's gaze changed. He didn't see how the relaxed shoulders actually settled into the perfect position to intercept inertia. "You have rights, as long as you're standing on your feet." Miller sneered, reaching for Bruce's collar. "And you won't be standing for long. I want to see your hands. Right now." He thought he controlled the situation. He thought this small man would now pull his hands out of his pockets and raise them in a gesture of surrender. He was already anticipating how he would spin him face first against the wall, how he would drive a knee into his thigh, how he would snap those very handcuffs on to demonstrate his power to random passers-by. But Miller didn't know that by demanding to see his hands, he was signing his own sentence. Because Bruce Lee's hands were not empty. There were no weapons in them, but they themselves were weapons that the officer had just asked to activate. Miller didn't wait for an answer. In his world, a pause is a sign of weakness, a crack in the armor where a knife must be immediately thrust. He acted according to an old, proven algorithm that had been hammered into his head for years at the police academy and reinforced in drunken brawls behind bars. A sharp lunge forward. It wasn't the movement of a master. It was the movement of a bulldozer, crude, devoid of grace, but possessing overwhelming mass. His hand, heavy and wet with rain, shot forward, aiming for Bruce's shoulder. The officer's fingers, thick and hard as sausages, dug into Bruce's trapezius muscle. Miller knew the anatomy of pain. He was looking for the brachial plexus, a bundle of nerves that, when pressed, makes knees buckle and eyes water. He expected to feel the soft, yielding flesh of a frightened civilian. He expected the victim to cry out, twitch, try to break away, giving him legal grounds to use the baton. Resisting arrest, a favorite phrase in his reports. But when his fingers closed, something happened that caused Miller's brain to hang for a split second. He didn't grab soft flesh. Under the wet fabric of the jacket, he felt something resembling steel cables wrapped in a thin layer of cotton. Bruce's muscles weren't tense in the usual sense. They possessed a tone that biomechanists call structural integrity. Miller squeezed harder, putting all the anger of his bad day into the grip. But Bruce didn't even wince. He stood in the rain, absolutely relaxed, as if this grab were not an act of aggression, but a friendly greeting. Have you ever tried to move a statue that isn't bolted to the floor, but weighs more than it looks? Miller tried. He yanked Bruce toward himself. The plan was simple. The jerk throws the person off balance, spin them around by the back. Face flies into the brick wall of the alley. Gravity and inertia do all the dirty work. The officer put 110 kilograms of his weight into this yank. By all laws of physics, Bruce's 60-kilogram body should have flown across the sidewalk like a rag doll, but physics decided to take the night off that evening. Or, more accurately, it began working by rules Miller hadn't studied. Bruce didn't budge an inch. When the officer pulled, he felt like he was pulling a lamppost, rooted in the center of the earth. This is called rooting. Bruce sat down slightly, shifting his center of gravity down and redistributing the vector of the pull through his legs straight into the wet asphalt. The energy of Miller's jerk went into the ground without harming the target. The officer froze. Bewilderment could be read in his eyes, which quickly changed to rage. His picture of the world was bursting at the seams. Small people shouldn't be this heavy. Victims shouldn't be this stable. "Are you deaf?" he growled, and shrill notes of fear appeared in his voice, which he tried to mask with aggression. "I said hands behind your head." Miller's ego demanded satisfaction. If force didn't work, more force must be applied. He decided to change tactics. He let go of the shoulder and lunged for Bruce's wrist. His goal changed. Now he didn't just want to push, he wanted to break. Twisting the arm behind the back is a classic control technique. If done sharply, with rotation, one can dislocate the shoulder joint or break the radial bone before the suspect realizes what is happening. Miller grabbed Bruce's left hand. This time he didn't intend to play. He put all his hatred for this incomprehensible calmness, for this rain, for this city into the grip. He began the rotation. His body worked like a lever, ready to grind the opponent's joints. He could already hear that phantom crunch in his head. He could already see Bruce's face contorted with pain. But he missed one tiny detail. When he grabbed the wrist, Bruce didn't pull his hand back. He didn't resist the pressure. Instead, Bruce did something that contradicts all instincts of self-preservation. He leaned forward. He stepped into the hold. To Miller, this looked like a mistake. The idiot is crawling into the trap himself, he thought. But it wasn't a mistake. It was an invitation. Bruce Lee opened the gates of his fortress, and Miller, blinded by the thirst for violence, joyfully ran inside, unaware that the gates behind him were already slamming shut. The officer traded his balance for aggression. He leaned forward too much, relied too much on Bruce resisting, and when there was no resistance, Miller fell into the void. He was still standing on his feet, but biomechanically, he was already dead. The question was only exactly how Bruce would decide to issue the death certificate of his balance. The second Miller fell into the void, his brain refused to accept reality. He expected resistance. He counted on Bruce's muscles tensing up, creating a solid support for his lever. But instead of a solid wall, he found air. His own inertia, accelerated by 110 kilograms of weight and years of impunity, became his traitor. He was falling forward, and his arm, which was supposed to be an instrument of torture, suddenly turned into the only point connecting him to equilibrium. But do you think that was the end? Do you think Bruce simply let him fall? No, that would be too simple. That would be impolite. Bruce Lee didn't just dodge. He accepted this gift of fate and unpacked it with frightening efficiency. When the officer's arm straightened at the elbow joint, trying to find support, it turned into a perfect first-class lever. Archimedes said, "Give me a fulcrum, and I will move the earth." Bruce didn't need the earth. He needed an elbow. At the moment, Miller's arm was in a fully extended, locked state. It lost its muscular protection. The biceps and triceps could no longer control the joint. The entire load fell on the ligaments and bones. And precisely in this millisecond, when the structure of the arm became rigid and brittle as a dry branch, Bruce placed his palm on the crook of the officer's elbow. It wasn't a strike. A strike is a crude transfer of energy that often dissipates. This was something much scarier. It was control. Bruce placed his left hand on Miller's elbow from above, and with his right hand, which the officer was still gripping, he performed a short, rotational movement. This is called supination. The radius bone of the forearm rotated around the ulna. For an ordinary person, it's just a movement. For Miller, it was the beginning of the end. The rotation of the wrist tore the officer's grip like a rotten thread, but Bruce didn't let him go. On the contrary, he captured Miller's wrist at the very moment the officer lost his grip. Now imagine the horror of the situation. Miller is falling forward. His arm is twisted outward. On his elbow lies the palm of a master, pressing with exactly enough force to bring the joint to the verge of dislocation, but not cross it. This is called pain control. Bruce used the inertia of Miller's fall to increase the pressure. The officer was breaking his own arm with his own weight. The faster he fell, the stronger the pain became. It was a perfect trap. To save yourself from pain, you need to stop falling, but gravity cannot be canceled. Miller made a sound that didn't resemble a human voice. It was a strangled wheeze, a mixture of surprise and agony. His knees hit the wet asphalt with a dull, sickening thud. Sprays of dirty water flew up, mixing with the rain. 110 kilograms of power and aggression were brought to their knees in 1.5 seconds. But the scariest thing was happening not to his body. The scariest thing was happening in his head. Miller was used to being the predator. He was used to people fearing his uniform, his baton, his voice. But now, kneeling in a puddle, with his arm twisted behind his back, he felt the world turning upside down. He looked down at Bruce's boots, which hadn't even moved. He tried to understand how this happened. How did he end up down below if he attacked from above? Why is his own strength working against him? This cognitive dissonance paralyzed his will more than the pain in his shoulder. He tried to twitch, tried to use his free hand to hit or grab Bruce's leg. It was the instinct of a cornered beast. But Bruce foresaw this too. A slight, almost imperceptible change in the angle of pressure on the elbow sent an electric shock of pain straight into the officer's spine. Miller froze. He understood the message without words. Move, and the arm stays with me as a trophy. Do you think Miller feared for his life at that moment? Oh no. At that moment, he feared something much worse. He heard metal clink on his belt, right above his right hip. Bruce Lee, holding the giant with one hand, reached for the officer's belt with the other. Miller knew that sound. He had heard it thousands of times. It was the sound of his own power, the sound of steel hitting steel. Bruce wasn't reaching for the gun. That would be too banal. He was reaching for what was to become the instrument of final total humiliation. And when Bruce's cold fingers touched the handcuffs, Miller realized that the physical pain was merely a prelude. The real execution was just beginning. The sound that followed was quiet, metallic, and unmistakably recognizable. Click, click, click. It is the sound of the ratchet mechanism locking the steel bow on the wrist. For Officer Miller, this sound was the soundtrack of his career. Usually it meant victory. It meant chaos was ordered, and the enemy defeated. But today, this sound rang out completely differently. It sounded like a prison cell door slamming shut behind his own back. Cold steel touched his right hand, the very one Bruce continued to hold in pain control. The first bracelet snapped onto Miller's wrist with frightening ease. At that moment, the officer's brain, cornered by pain and shock, made a last, desperate attempt at rebellion. He felt Bruce's grip on his shoulder loosen for a split second. It was a microscopic pause, a tiny gap in control. Miller thought, "This is a mistake." He got distracted by the handcuffs. "This is my chance." Have you ever seen a drowning man? At the last moment, he clutches at a straw, even if that straw is a snake. Miller decided to use his free left hand. He couldn't reach the baton. He couldn't reach the gun. But he could reach Bruce's leg. The plan was born in his head instantly. Grab the ankle, pull toward himself, knock the Chinese man into the mud, and there, use mass. 110 kilograms against 60. On the ground, he would crush him. Miller sharply threw his left hand back, putting the remnants of his explosive power into this movement. He thought he was making a tactical maneuver. He thought he was seizing the initiative. But he didn't know that Bruce's mistake, that very loosening of the grip, was not a mistake. It was bait. Bruce Lee was waiting for this movement. Moreover, he provoked it. In martial arts, there is a principle. If you want the opponent to go left, push him right, and then let go. Bruce allowed Miller to believe in the possibility of salvation, and when the officer brought his left hand behind his back, trying to find support, he himself, voluntarily, brought his limbs into the perfect position for binding. It was a moment of truth, cruel and ironic. Miller reached for salvation, but found only the second bracelet of the handcuffs. Bruce intercepted the officer's left wrist the moment it entered the dead zone, behind the back, at waist level. Miller felt the touch but didn't have time to react. His muscles were stretched. His joints were at the limit of mobility. Bruce clicked the second lock. Click. The sound was final, like a period in a death sentence. Now, picture this scene. A police officer, the terror of the district, a man who considered himself the top of the food chain. He is kneeling in a dirty puddle. His hands are shackled behind his back with his own handcuffs. The rain beats against his face, washing away not only sweat, but also the remnants of authority. He tried to twitch, to test the strength of the steel, but the chain between the bracelets was short. Any movement caused sharp pain in the shoulders. He was immobilized. He was neutralized. And the most humiliating part, he did it practically himself, following invisible guides that Bruce had set for him. Miller looked up. He expected to see rage. He expected to see triumph. In his world, if you defeated an enemy, you must enjoy the moment. You must spit on him, insult him, show your superiority. But what he saw in Bruce's eyes destroyed his psyche more than the physical defeat. Bruce looked at him without emotion. There was no gloating or anger in his gaze. There was boredom. Such an expression appears on the face of an adult who has just taken matches away from an unreasonable child. "You're under arrest," Miller said quietly. It was delirium. It was a defensive reaction of the brain refusing to accept the new reality. He tried to use words as a shield, but they crumbled into dust. Bruce didn't even smile at this absurd threat. He took a step back, breaking physical contact, but not breaking the psychological noose. Miller remained alone in his ring of steel and pain. He was a prisoner of his own weapon. And at that moment, he realized a terrible thing. The key to his freedom was not at the station. The key was in the pocket of the man he had called a victim 5 minutes ago, and this man was not going to call for backup. He was going to teach a lesson not written in any police manual. Miller squeezed his eyes shut. He pulled his head into his shoulders as much as the bound hands allowed and tensed his abdominal muscles. In his universe, built on violence, the finale should have arrived now. He expected a kick to the face, or maybe a baton to the ribs, his own weapon turned against its master. That would be logical. That would be fair by the laws of the street. He prepared for pain because pain was understandable to him. Pain can be endured, and scars can later be shown in a bar as proof of toughness. But seconds passed, and the blow did not come. Instead of the crunch of bones, he heard only the sound of rain and his own raspy breathing, and then he felt it. Warmth. Bruce Lee hadn't left. He leaned toward the officer. Miller opened his eyes and flinched, expecting a trick, but Bruce was as calm as a surgeon after a successful operation. A small, silvery object flashed in his fingers. A key. That very standard key for Smith & Wesson handcuffs that hung on Miller's ring. The officer's heart skipped a beat. Hope flared up in him with a bright, blinding flame. He's afraid, Miller thought. The Chinese guy realized what he's done. He realized he attacked a police officer, and now he's trying to buy his way out. He wants to free me. This thought was a lifebuoy for his sinking ego. Bruce will now remove the handcuffs, apologize, and run away. And then Miller will pull out his gun. Oh yes, then everything will fall into place. But Bruce didn't reach for the locks on the wrists. Instead, his hands slowly, almost solemnly, slid toward the breast pocket of Miller's uniform shirt. The officer froze, not understanding what was happening. He felt Bruce's fingers gently parted the fabric of the pocket and dropped the key inside. The metal clinked against a button. It was a quiet sound, but to Miller it sounded like a coffin lid slamming shut. "You have the key," Bruce whispered. His voice was devoid of threat. It held only cold, detached philosophy. "Freedom is 2 inches from your heart, but you can't take it." And then the meaning of this sophisticated torture dawned on Miller. He tried to twist, tried to reach the breast pocket with his hands shackled behind his back. But human anatomy has limits. Shoulder joints don't bend at such angles. His fingers scratched his lower back, but the key, the saving key, lay on his chest. It was so close, and at the same time, it was on another planet. It was a Tantalus Trap embodied in reality. To get the key, he needed to free his hands. To free his hands, he needed the key. Bruce straightened up. He looked at the kneeling giant writhing in the mud, trying to perform an anatomically impossible action. It was a spectacle of complete, total impotence. "Power is not a badge and not a baton," Bruce said, and these words cut into Miller's memory deeper than any blow. Power is the ability to break a person's life, but the conscious choice not to do so. Today I gave you your life. Try to use it more wisely than you used your strength. Bruce turned around. He didn't run. He walked at a calm pace, dissolving into the gray veil of the Seattle rain. He left the police officer alone in the middle of a dark alley. Miller was left alone with his choice. He had 2 paths. He could lie here in the mud under the rain until a patrol found him, and then he would have to explain to his colleagues how one unarmed man turned him into a laughingstock. That would be the end of his reputation, the end of his career. Or he could crawl. Crawl to the road, humiliatingly asking for help from those very civilians he was used to despising. In any case, Officer Miller, who entered this alley, died. In his place remained a broken man with a key in his pocket that he couldn't reach. And here's the question I want to leave with you today. A question that forces a reconsideration of the boundaries of good and evil. Was Bruce's deed an act of mercy? After all, he didn't break Miller's arm, didn't cripple him, didn't leave him disabled. Formally, This is humanism. But look at it from the other side. Bruce destroyed his psyche. He created a situation in which Miller was forced to admit his complete helplessness. It was psychological castration. Was this not crueler than just a punch to the jaw? If you possessed the power of Bruce Lee, how would you have acted? Would you have punished the villain physically, giving him a chance to keep shreds of pride through pain? Or would you have destroyed him morally, turning him into a helpless doll? Write your verdict in the comments, because the line between a teacher and a tormentor is sometimes thinner than a razor blade.